Thank you for coming tonight. We had no idea people come to a topic, death by design. We're wonderful that all you guys could come. I met Kimberly 2 years ago. I was doing some phone calls for a company called RX Precision, which does pharmacogenetic testing. And the company started based on senior citizens being in nursing homes. The gentleman was on 21 drugs, and he was sitting in a corner looking up at a television. And so I can't remember, I think I bumped into your podcast. Her podcast is Death by Design. And I thought, well, that's an interesting podcast. So I called Kimberly up, I got her on the phone, and we had this delightful conversation about the state of healthcare, the state of elderly care, the state of palliative care, and what we do with people, and kind of warehousing people and sanitizing the concept of death. And I have since listened to her. I listened to 2 of her podcasts this week, and they're wonderful stories that you would think they're going to be more about death, but they're very much about people's lives and how they grow to appreciate their lives. So the tour that she's been on for almost a year now is not just about death by design, but it's life by design as well.
Yeah,
is that fair?
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
You know, I think if you live well, you might have a large opportunity to die well.
Yeah. So when we put together this speaker series, I thought, well, when I saw that Kimberly I didn't know if she was going to be in the Midwest, but I invited her and she was very gracious to come and speak to us.
Yeah,
So
I was thrilled.
Thank you for all. I look forward to the conversation. She'll talk and then ask questions and open that up to anybody who has any questions about that. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for, I've never been to Iowa, and I've been here for the last 2 weeks. I worked with a hospice in Sioux City.
Yeah.
And I did not realize Sioux City was in 3 different states. And I'm in Walmart talking about how I love Iowa. And she goes, you know you're in Nebraska. I'm like, good tip. Good tip. I mean, it was like, okay. And then I figured it out. Because it was like right there, all the connections, you know, Nebraska, Iowa, and then South Dakota. So I worked in Iowa. I shopped in Nebraska, but I lived in South Dakota for like the last week. So amazing. So thanks for coming out tonight. I know that sometimes these subjects of around death is somewhat difficult, and people don't want to hear them. But I hope that you walk away a little bit inspired to live tonight, because that's what the dying has taught me. I cashed in my retirement at 45, and never thought that I would be doing what I was doing now, but wanted to make a bigger impact. I wanted to live my life, and I got caught up in this corporate world. But to start, I was with my mom and dad, and I was begging them not to send me to 4 more years of prison called college, because I had thought I had spent so much time in prison called elementary, middle school, and high school, and I wanted to go to New York and be part of the television and film industry in Broadway. And I remember sitting there on the steps in Richmond, Virginia, just crying, because not only were my parents going to make me go to college, they were going to make me pay for it. And it was a way for me to step into adulthood with the security of my parents, which, you know, at the time I thought was so sucky, but hindsight, it was just a wonderful life experience, because I valued and I studied probably a lot more because I was paying for it. I couldn't afford to do another class. And so it really taught me a lot about discipline. But I went to Meredith College, which is an all-girls college in Raleigh, North Carolina, which if you have a young woman in your life thinking about colleges, I would highly recommend Meredith College, because they taught women that they really taught women how to be leaders. And they taught women that in the school and the undergraduate program, that people, how to become a leader, and that people do not follow authority, they follow inspiration. And how do you become a leader that inspires people to do things they never thought they would do, but because of the leadership skills that you implode on them, they'll do anything for you. And I think the basicness is that you start caring about people. You start looking at them not as employees, but actually human beings. And you start knowing them not as a title, but as, Johnny with 3 kids and running late because you know it's the first day of school, and of course you're going to run late. Don't ever tell me. Don't come bother me when you're running late on the first day. You spend those time with the kids. So yeah, I was just heartbroken that I had to spend 4 years in college. And my father, who I'm very close to, I remember going to college and he said to me, I'm going to be really disappointed if you get an English degree. And I was like, huh? He goes, yeah, you've had a pad and a pencil your whole life, and I don't think you should get an English degree. And I said, Dad, do you really want me to hate you? I mean, first of all, you're making me go. Second, you're making me pay. And then you're telling me not to get an English degree, where I really wanted to spend at least 4 years in literature and become the ultimate writer that I wanted to be. But he said this. He said, I never want you to put your passion in a position for it to make, or put it in a position to make money, because you'll lose the passion if you try to make a living out of it. And I want you to keep the passion that you have for writing. And so when I arrived at Meredith College, since I'm a daddy's girl and was not going to disappoint my father, I chose not to do an English degree. And so I was like, I need to pick another degree. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do? And then I was like, well, I'm kind of social. I have to work. Social work. Yeah. Let me tell you, it's not my kind of social people. Not at all. At all. But let me tell you what it did teach me. It taught me how to be an active listener, how to ask a question and shut up. It taught me to never project my morals and values onto other people. And they're tricksters of the trade in social work. Like, for instance, when you disagree with someone, and this is a good tip for if you're married too, hopefully your partner is not here, but if you disagree with someone and they're coming at you, all you do is in a very calm voice say, tell me more about that. That's interesting. And it really diffuses a lot of the kind of debate, because I think social workers are students of life, and we're taught to think of people who come into our life as teachers and clues of what's going to go on in our life. So that's why I fell in love with social work. But once I graduated, I went to New York City, and within 30 days I landed a job on Saturday Night Live, a peon, a little peon, gopher, apprentice, but my social work skills came in real handy, because those actors, they need a lot of therapy. And I was always, tell me more, tell me more. But just like all human beings, we all have our insecurities. And what was great about my experience at Saturday Night Live, long hours, but really a cool, creative environment that you saw scripts being created for a live show. And there's still people that, I was the meatball sub runner, and I still want to shove those sandwiches in some people's faces that I work with. And since we're being recorded, I won't even mention their names. But they know who they are. But then again, you're sitting in a green room and someone's picking a guitar and talking about the loss of a son that ended tragically, and that he's creating a song for his son. And I go in the other room and I'm like, man, that man is really cool. And the guy said, are you talking about Eric Clapton? So it was really cool to be around this creative environment. Does anyone know who Gloria Monty is? I love that not once has someone raised their hand, which I'm so proud to introduce you to her, because as a 15-year-old, I guess I was even a 12-year-old, as a 12-year-old, this woman was my hero. and she was the executive producer of a show called General Hospital. And she changed daytime television and how a story is told. She implemented how a book is told, beginning, middle, and end. And she changed how daytime television actually was written with a storyline called Luke and Laura. And so it exploded. And so when I saw as a 12-year-old a woman as an executive producer, I was like, that's what I want to do. So when CBS one day called me over at SNL and said, hey, we're looking for someone to assist us in daytime casting and cover Broadway and look for new talent, and LA, we have 2 shows in LA and 2 shows in New York, I didn't have to think twice. I totally jumped at it because I was just enamored by Gloria Monty, who had then retired, which was awesome. So I spent several years a couple of years at CBS. At daytime, they had 2 shows, 2 in New York, As the World Turns and Guiding Light, that are no longer on the network, as well as 2 in Los Angeles, Bold and the Beautiful and Young and the Restless. So one day I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, oh, this is not my dream. And I looked out at my window in between, Madison Avenue and right down the street from Rockefeller Center, right in Midtown. And I saw these people, when you're 41 floors up, people look like they're scurrying everywhere in New York. And I just wanted to be down there with them. And I felt like I was on some veranda in a make-believe world. And I was in a lot of ways. So within 2 weeks, I packed my things and decided to move back to North Carolina. And there were some college mates that were still in Raleigh, so I said, let me go back to Raleigh. And this is where my life changed. But before I tell you what changed my life, let me tell you a little bit about who I am. I'm not the girl that falls in love with every guy that comes into her life, but my girlfriends are. I've messed up names because it's Joe this week and George next week, and I can't keep them straight. And I was never like that. And I thought sort of my heart was broken, like it didn't work right, like not that it was broken by someone, that it just didn't work, because these girlfriends of mine were like Google-eyed with these guys. I'm just like, I don't see it. I've never experienced what you're talking about. But then I met a boy called Rob Apple, who is a Garner police officer, and I totally got what they were talking about. Because I was the kind of girl that I would never change my name, and Rob's name was Rob Apple, and within 4 months of dating, I was writing Kimberly Apple. It was just that radical of a twist, and I felt like it was a spiritual connection, and I can't really explain more than that. It was just, he didn't watch television that often. He read a lot, and I remember looking across the table thinking in my head, not out loud, oh my God, I love you. I thought he was the best looking thing ever. And so his dream was to become an FBI agent, and he got it. He got into Quantico, passed all the tests, and as he was getting into Quantico, I got a call from a friend down in Wilmington saying, hey, there's some shows that are being filmed in Wilmington, North Carolina, and one was Dawson's Creek down in Wilmington, and I was like, man, beach. Rob's in the FBI Academy. Why not go down there and see if I can get back into the film and television industry? But they were on hiatus when I got there. So my grandmother had just passed away with breast cancer, and so I wanted to give back to the organization that helped my family, Hospice. And so I wanted to volunteer with Hospice. And so when I arrived at this great organization, this kind, burly nurse said, hey, it's pronounced hospice. And I was like, good tip, good tip. So she escorted me into this room. Oh yeah, you talking about green with healthcare. So she escorted me into a room with like 8 people in it, and they were interviewing me and just really like hammering me questions about hospice volunteers. And I was just like, man, these people take their volunteers so seriously. I just am one body. What do you need me to file? I didn't realize you had to do all this kind of in-depth interview. And I think one of the people who was interviewing me saw my facial expression, and they stopped the interview and they said, "You know this is a job interview, don't you?" And I was like all good social workers are trained to do. I said, "Tell me more." And like they told me the salary, and they told me the benefits. I was like, benefits? And I was thinking, you know, gosh, could I do this for 4 or 5 months and then go back to television? And I was like, yeah, I think I could. And they hired me. And I think the joke was on me, because every time I say never, or, you know, let's just do this for a little bit, you know, I'm none the wiser. The universe comes down and just plucks me in the middle of my forehead and says, the joke's on you, because those 4 or 5 months lasted 17 years. And what I have found out, that deep inside, I am a true journalist. I follow the good stories. Whether I make them up or whether I am sitting there listening and writing about them. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in the classroom. I mean, the real classroom, where World War II veterans were talking about what it took to be in World War II and what they saw. And you would go out of that room and their wife and daughter would be in tears, and you're like, hey, what's the matter? And you realize that they never heard these stories before. And they said, you know, he came home and put a duffel bag in the back closet and never spoke of it again. And he alone carried this burden, and now he's on his deathbed. And the character it must have taken to live through that. And then you would hear other stories that would have regrets, and then suddenly you're like, man, maybe I should forgive that person, because that person is right. I'm the only one suffering if I don't forgive. So I'm learning all of these life lessons. It came to be 17 years, and I was changing. I fell in love with hospice, and anything I do, like I lived in New York, it's my New York. I work for hospice, it's my hospice. You know, it's like I own it, and it becomes a part of my DNA. And what I was finding is that the hospice Medicare benefit wasn't changing, and it was scaring me, because I believe the hospice benefit is underfunded and overregulated, to the point that I just talked with the CEO of a hospice in New England, and she was almost in tears because she thought she might have to discharge a 103-year-old from hospice services, because perhaps they did not meet what Medicare calls, which is crap, med speak, criteria. And I was like, you know what? We've got to change this. We, the consumer, need to have a voice in our own health and death. And so after 17 years, I resigned. And I called my dad, and I said, Dad, I resigned today. He's like, huh? I was like, yep. And there was something inside not working anymore, and I feel like I can make a bigger difference for hospice on another level, another platform. He goes, well, how are you going to make money? And I said, well, I cashed in my retirement. And I said, Dad, you still there? He's like, just one thing. Just tell me you're not moving home. And I'm like, I said, no, I'm not moving home. But I wanted to create a platform that anyone that could possibly experience death one day, maybe they had a story they would like to share that could change how people live and die. And so, to me, the palliative care physician and the hospice nurse and the hospice medical director, they were key people to have on my podcast. But the really interesting stories that I was looking for had nothing to do with healthcare. It was the woman who had been married for 50 years, who the last 10 years was helping or taking care of her husband with dementia. and struggling with everything inside her to keep him at home because that's what he wanted. I thought her story was so important. And then Adam Hayden, who's 38 years old with 3 children under the age of 8, who just happened to have a headache one day and found out it was a brain tumor, 3rd to 4th stage brain tumor. I thought his story was very important to tell. And not only did Adam receive a brain tumor, he never stopped living, and he's still living. But he created an online support group, a virtual support group with other people with brain tumors, and has visited Washington several times to advocate for those who are with serious illness, and it just happens to be a brain tumor. And I was like, whoa, that's the story I want to tell too. So how do we talk to the creatives? How do they see death? How do we put color in a very black and white subject? And actually maybe even look forward to our own death. So I started this podcast, and within the first 90 days, we started getting downloads after downloads, and I'm like, and I looked to see what other death and dying podcasts were out there, and there was only one other at the time, and I was really shocked that people were even interested, because as in hospice, it was like no one wants to talk about death. And I was finding this new refreshing attitude that people actually did want to talk about it. They just didn't want anyone to look away when they shared their stories, and they were crying one moment and laughing the next. And we Americans are so good at turning away when we're uncomfortable, when we can't solve a problem, when people are grieving, and because we want to solve it, instead of saying, this sucks. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not looking anywhere else except in your eye, and I'm going to sit here. And I'm not going to say anything, but I'm going to sit here with you, and we will stay right here until you're ready to get up. I don't think we're good at that. And I can tell you why I don't think that, because there's just studies. How many days of bereavement do you get in the corporate world? You know, you bury someone so monumental, and you're supposed to go back to work after 3 paid days? That's crap. That's really crap. So I understand why we're suffering and numbing out, because we never are allowed to have these true in-depth emotional breakdowns and then move on. I was just talking to a friend of mine who lost a son 26 years ago, and we were laughing about her son and some of the things he did, and she started crying. And the first thing she said was, I'm so sorry. I'm like, about what? Do you think I don't think you would drop a tear even 24 years later? It makes me feel good that she does. That she loved her son, and it's still real to her. So while this podcast was growing, the audience, I decided to write a book. And I thought I was going to do a workbook, how-to book. And then suddenly I found myself, at home without a full-time job in about 20 years. And I found myself angry. And so I started writing this book, and I would cry every day. And suddenly I was like, let me just journal about what I want the book to be about. And that journal became the book. Because my anger was not really anger, it was grief. With people that I had seen that entered my life and had died, but even those monumental people like grandparents and friends. So my friend Tim and Remy, they're a great couple, and they were floating through Wilmington on their boat, but they used to RV full time. And I got there, and Tim's like, you know what? I know what you should do. Buy an RV and go state to state and tell these stories. Maybe they can change how other people live and die. And I said, Tim, there's no way in hell I would ever buy an RV. I can barely drive my Mazda, and I have a dog and a house. There's no way I can ever do that. So he kept on and on me, but he floated. They went from an RV to a boat, and they floated on down the intercoastal. And that weekend, I just happened to go to my best friend's house, and I was like, Sally, they're telling me to get an RV and go state to state. And when it's real, when you talk to your college mates, and they are just brutally honest with you. And they're like, oh my God, who would you kill, basically, when you're driving that thing? Because, they've grown up with you. They know all the secrets, and they have the pictures that, you just glimpse at them because they're in some lockbox, and they'll make you do anything you want because you don't want those pictures on social media. It's like, how do I prevent you not putting those pictures out there? Those are the kind of rich relationships I got at Meredith College. And so we were joking, and I had to double down. I was like, Sally, I'm going to be quite frank with you. Unless Jesus himself shows me a burning bush, I will never buy an RV and go state to state. Who would do that? So Sally was a smoker. And so we went on her front porch, and she lit a cigarette. And suddenly I see out of the corner of my eye her neighbor. And this neighbor has a bottle of lighter fluid in his hands. And suddenly he's spraying this on this azalea bush in front of the yard. And I'm looking at Sally, and I'm looking at this neighbor, and I'm looking at Sally, and she's just smoking away. And suddenly, within 3 matches, he had lit that bush on fire. And I'm just like, what the? So Sally's like, guess you're going on tour. I'm like, wait a minute. So I walked over to the neighbor that I had never met, and I said, hey, what are you doing? And he looks at me like, I'm burning a bush, crazy. I'm like, yeah, I get that. I get that you're burning a bush. But why? He goes, you know what? My wife has been on me to burn this azalea bush for 2 or 3 years. And she was in there telling me how lazy I was as a husband. And it kind of got under my skin. I went to the garage, got this lighter fluid, and came out here in 3 matches, and that bush is ablazing. And I'm back in like good graces. I'm like, oh man, any other time. So I told him the story, and all he did was barely look at me, and he's like looking at the bush because he's real proud of it, and looking at me, he's, yeah, good luck on your tour. And I'm just like, whoa, man. And so I do believe when you get a sign that big, when you ask for it and you receive it, then I highly recommend that you implement it, because you just never know if you don't. So within 2 weeks, I had bought an RV, rented out my house, and I didn't know what I was going to do. But I thought, okay, let me just figure this out. And I'm walking Haven in our park right down the street, and I get this call from Vermont. And it's, hi, this is Roberta from Cabot Cheese. And I'm like, of course, I'm from the South. I'm like, Cabot Cheese? Yes. She's like, we've heard about your tour. I'm not even publicizing what I'm doing. I'm thinking in the back of my head that she's thinking like, oh yeah, a friend of mine who lives in Pennsylvania has a friend that has a sister in Raleigh that has that lives down the street from you and is complaining about this big RV sitting in front of your house because you live in the historic district and there's no off-street parking, so the RV's taking the majority of the street and everyone's complaining in your neighborhood. And I'm thinking, how does she know I'm like, okay. And suddenly she said, we really would like to know more about the tour, and we really would love to see if we can financially support you. Again, my social work skills were so ingrained at Meredith, I said, tell me more. And she said, we could wrap your RV with sponsors. You should get other sponsors for your tour. I was like, that's a great idea. And so she goes, we will put money in, we'll wrap your RV, and we'll send cheese to wherever you are going to go. It's like, And I said, that's great, Roberta. I get it. But first, you got to tell me, what does Cabot cheese have to do with death and dying? And really, what she said was amazing to me, and I can still hear her explaining it and how my heart just sort of opened up. She goes, we're a company that is owned by the farmers. And we on the farm have been talking to our children about life and death and the life cycle for decades. And we thought we could help. And I was like, you can. First of all, Roberta, what better death than wine and cheese? So Cabot Cheese became my first largest premier sponsor. And I tell you, I cannot buy cheese. I did not buy those Wisconsin curds. They were given to me. Very loyal to Cabot Cheese because they are on a mission, not only with their farmers, with how they operate, but they really do care. And enough to send samples here and for you to try out and for me to say, I don't think I would be here without Cabot Cheese. Very grateful for them. So as you can see, here are some of the logos. Do you know what it's like to drive that rig down I-29 or what is this? 80, yes, 80 West coming from Nebraska. Because you know, when you drive it, it's like you forget that it's wrapped with death logos. And you'll occasionally look over like, hey brother, what's going on? Kind of like give you a little nod. You know how you do in your car. And people are like, what the? But I will say, no one has cut me off. They're like, stay away from the Deathmobile, which is awesome. And with every great adventure, you need a sidekick. And I need to clarify something tonight to you. I'm the sidekick. You know, this dog totally feels like I'm doing this for her. And in so many rare moments, she can do so much more than I can. When I was shadowing a palliative care team in Greensboro, North Carolina at Cone Health, this dog would migrate herself as we walked down the hall into a waiting room. And these people who were waiting to hear the news that their loved one came out of surgery, or perhaps the bad news that they didn't, suddenly she was going person to person, and some of these people got on all fours, and maybe for a moment, the worry was just a little lighter. And then that afternoon, we got a chance to meet a wonderful terminally ill 7-year-old who was nonverbal. And for the few hours that my dog, Haven, and this child were together, I saw them speak full languages. And I just can't tell you, when you take a dog into a palliative care or a hospice staff, when their shoulders drop because of compassion fatigue, and they get on all fours, and they feel like the dog is giving to them instead of them giving to someone else. She does something that I cannot do. So I accept my role as the sidekick and the driver, and the chauffeur, and I will let her continue to do her magic. This is where we're at. The triangles are, and these are all my sponsors down below. You know, the triangles are where I've been, and the circles are already planned events. We will drive to 49 states. And I would drive to the 50th, but I think I would sink because the RV cannot float. So we will fly to Hawaii, but that's after we come out of Alaska and come across Canada and come back down through Michigan on our way back east. So we will hit Canada. So we'll have 2 states, 2 countries that we will hit by the time we're done. And what better way to meet people where they are in their own hometown to ignite a passion that I'm living now because of so many reasons. But I wanted to play something for you because I wanted to sort of start with the mood. And you know, when we talk, I think about my mortality every day. I have to admit that to you. And my dad and my mom thinks it's morbid, I get it, But this is the thing, when I think that this might be the last day I live, I tend to live more boldly. I tend to not put off things. I tend to do things with intention. Like, you know, this morning we traveled from South Dakota to Nebraska, and we were traveling today to, you know, right here locally. And so we've been traveling for the last couple of days. And, you know, when this one gets up at 5 a.m. and wants a walk, and you're just like, oh my gosh, no, let's just sleep in a little bit. And then you think, what if this is the last sunrise I ever see? And suddenly it becomes this whole new thing. Like, let me get the coffee. Let me listen. And it's almost like I'm rushing so I don't miss anything. And so she is even a teacher to me. But what comes to it is like, I always think, will people remember me? What will be my legacy? And I think that's a great question, because that really dictates how I live. And this video that I love, I've seen it probably 15 years ago, and it still moves me today. And I'd like to share it with you. So when I ask the question, you know, how will I be remembered? I think of this video. Because it's the small things that are huge when you're about to lose someone. The idiosyncrasies that have driven you crazy your entire life is going to be the first thing you miss. And I love what she says about how people are imperfect, but that makes them perfect for you. And I think that's a little bit of what we're all here for tonight, is how do we create a life around what matters most? And that's what I'm talking about. Haven, you want to sit down? So she's like, you're busy. You're busy. Come over here. I know you know a camera's on. Lay down. Lay down right now. So you remember, lay down. You remember the boy that I fell in love with, the FBI agent?
I was wondering when you get back to that.
This is Rob, and this is our story. And in 2004, I had an opportunity to go back to film and television in Wilmington with another show coming to town. There was some opportunities that I could have explored, and the show was One Tree Hill. And something personal shook the foundation of who I was, and I ended up staying another 15 years in hospice care. So pretty crazy. But I'd like to read you, Rob, and my story. Everyone has a story about how they end up where they are. Circumstance, happenstance, and a very special person transformed my life almost 20 years ago and ignited a passion that I'm now living. After leaving New York City, I moved back to a small town outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, known as Garner. I fell in love for the very first time with a boy that happened to be a Garner police officer. His dream was to one day become an FBI agent. I refer to him as Apple. No relations to the computer, unfortunately, but Rob Apple. Our relationship was full of respect, love, laughter, and adventure. He opened new doors to different ways of thinking. He exposed me to movies such as Down the Rabbit Hole and several books by Stephen Hawking. He loved the outdoors, and he loved to cook. He was an avid rock climber. He thought nature was his true church. When Apple was accepted to the FBI Academy, he chose to dedicate his time to becoming the agent he dreamed of as a child. We mutually agreed to briefly halt our relationship, making promises to reconnect at his FBI graduation. I had professional aspirations of my own, so it made perfect sense. I was moving to Wilmington. Our last weekend together was just magic. I remember clearly driving away in my Jeep Wrangler, heading east, and watching his Del Sol disappear in my rearview mirror as he headed north to the FBI Academy. I felt overwhelmed and grateful at the same time. I was so thankful for the emotions I could feel toward another human being. I was not afraid, because I knew in time we would be together again, because I knew he was the one. But that was the last time I ever saw him. There were no cards, phone calls, or emails after that last weekend. What I thought was a pause in our relationship, allowing both of us time to obtain our individual goals, was it actually a breakup? And I was devastated. So I did move to Wilmington. I packed my things and moved to Wilmington, North Carolina in 1999. I chose the coastal town of Wilmington, hoping to once again work in the film industry. Wilmington's film and studio opportunities were on hiatus when I arrived, so I took a position with a hospice organization overseeing their volunteer department. It was a temporary position, or so I thought. My life seemed to be gaining traction. I was working full-time, living at the beach, and meeting new people. It had been 4 years since my relationship with Apple had ended, when a coworker at hospice asked me to be a bridesmaid in her wedding. Let me just stop there. When you have a broken heart, and a woman who is in love asks you to be a bridesmaid in her wedding, it was the last thing I ever wanted to do. And then you see the picture of the dress that you actually have to buy. No, thank you. I don't want to be a part of this. But I loved her, and I couldn't say no. So I said yes, and I bought the ugly dress, and I participated in the showers and all that other crap, because I was still heartbroken. And in the South, we have these things called rehearsal dinners. Do you have them here? Oh yeah, because they want to suck the complete life out of your entire weekend. And don't forget the gifts, you know. So we had, in the South, you know, we're in the Bible Belt. You know, you never show up after the prayer. And I was just dragging my feet. I did not want to go to this rehearsal dinner. So I arrived late. And after the prayer, and I snuck in and just picked a random table. This rehearsal dinner changed my life. And who I was before this rehearsal dinner, I don't know that person anymore, because my life changed that dramatically. So this is what happened. The night before the wedding, I arrived late, very late, to the rehearsal dinner. Overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, the Oceanic restaurant at Wrightsville Beach is truly magical. Running in, I picked a random table, struck up a conversation with a lovely group attending the dinner. They were complete strangers to me. Making small talk, a lady next to me mentioned her husband used to work for the police department in Garner, North Carolina. Without much pause, I said, I used to know someone that worked for the Garner Police Department. Who? She asked. Apple, I responded as casually as I could. Wow, she said as she continued to eat. Now that's a sad story. My mind began to race. Was he killed in the line of duty? I chose not to say a word and let her share her next thought. He died, she said. He was in love with this girl in Garner, she continued, and broke up with her and never told her that he had cancer. He died in hospice care only 18 months later. I was completely paralyzed. I was in shock. I don't recall much after that moment, but I do know I managed to reach out, grab that woman's arm, look her straight in the eyes, and say, "You're talking to the girl." Of course, she turned white. But guess what I had to do the next day? I had to go to that daggum wedding and stand up there and watch a couple exchange vows. And I think it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, because I felt like I was screaming at the top of my lungs and no one heard me. And up there, I don't even remember the ceremony. But I do remember making the decision of, I need to find his parents. And Rob grew up in Indiana, and we were in North Carolina, and we had only dated, you know, like a year and a half or whatever. And so I never met his parents. I think I talked to them maybe on the phone once or something like that. They knew of me, but, you know, it was no big deal. But I remember Rob saying that he used to fly into Fort Wayne Airport and that he would drive about 20 to 30 minutes to his parents' house. So on Monday morning, now the Vice President of Communication and Outreach for the second largest nonprofit hospice in the state of North Carolina, I got my staff around and I said, help me figure out how many towns is around Fort Wayne within 20-minute drive. And we figured out what it took to drive 20 minutes and how many miles that was, and we found 12 cities and towns. And I was like, okay. And I don't know if you have numbers that appear in your life, but mine are 7 and 12. And so they always come up. You know, I was born 7'12", I weighed 7'12". Yeah, come here. And I, guess what time I was born? Lay down. No, 12:43. But 4 and 3 can make 7. So what I did when I had those 12 cities, I just counted down to the 7th town. And I said, let me just pick this one. And so I picked up the phone and I dialed and I put the phone down. I picked up the phone again and I couldn't bring myself to dial a number. And I was like, get over this, it's probably not even the right number. So I dialed it and someone answered and I said, hi, I'm looking for Rob Apple's parents. He was a Garner police officer and an FBI agent. And there was a little bit of a pause and a lady said, you're talking to his mother. And I was like, this is like in the middle of the morning now. And I said, I'm Kimberly Paul. And she goes, I know exactly who you are. And you finally know. And I said, is it true? And she goes, Rob died May 7th, 2000 from melanoma and never wanted you to know. But before we got too far in the conversation, next thing I know, she said, you know, we're celebrating his 4th anniversary because Rob was born on June 2nd, the same day his father was. So they wanted to celebrate Rob on May 7th. And so Keith, his father, could have a little bit of a birthday celebration. And before I knew it, she goes, why don't you come? Why don't you come and celebrate it with us? So 4 weeks later, I was on a plane to go see his parents. And when I got there, his mother, Lynn, said, you know, grandmothers are coming. There's people that want to meet you. His sisters are coming. I hope that's okay. And I was like, sure. And then she said, there's a few things that I want to show you before everyone descends on the house. And so when we got in the house, she took my hand and guided me into the master bedroom where her and Keith, Rob's parents, stayed. And there was this picture of me and their son on the dresser. And she goes, there's one other thing I want to show you. And she opened the garage door, and there was his Honda Del Sol in the garage, the car we dated in. And I'm sorry, guys, you know, us women, it's about the car because things happen in the car that are kind of awkward but rememberable and supposed to be romantic, but we still remember it. And so the car is important, you know, it's like, that's what we dated in. And I think you can also recall your first love, what car they dated or drove. So, I mean, it's something special about it, right? So I said, can I sit in it? And she said, yes. And when I sat down in it, it still smelled of him. And I felt like I could close my eyes and the windows were down, NPR was on the radio, and here we were going on a regular night from Garner to downtown Raleigh to eat dinner. And then suddenly I would open my eyes and I'm in this world that I couldn't even comprehend. I felt like I was still in shock. So I got out of the car and I walked back into the house and I told his mother, Lynn, I said, Lynn, why would he not tell me? I said, did he not love me? And she said, what did you tell him when he worked the night shift with the Garner Police Department? I was like, Lynn, I know you don't know me that well, but I'm a very chatty human being. I don't know if I can remember exactly what I told him. She goes, there was something specific. You see, 6 months before I ever knew Rob Apple, dated him, or fell in love with him, I lost a friend in high school, Brian Butler, to bone cancer. And they took him piece by piece, to the point that he was so unrecognizable that I was still mourning his loss at 24 years old, high school, you know, a friend. And so when Rob worked the night shift, if I said this once, I said it a million times because I was still grieving over Brian Butler. And I said, look, I know this is what you want to do. My dad is a police officer. I get it. I would never ask you not to be what you want to be. But at night, the bad guys come out. So please be careful. Take precaution, because I cannot lose anyone else right now in my life. I can't do it. And Lynn kind of leaned over and said, he heard you. He heard you. And I was like, but that's not what I meant. And so he didn't tell me. And what's crazy is a lot of people want to romanticize the story. But you're talking to the girl that thought the boy did not love her. And then she found out the boy loved her more than she could ever comprehend. And let me just say this. God, I wish I knew. Do you understand how important the conversation is? It's so important. Because, you know, one day I will face my own end of life, and I hope I go to, you know, and I grew up Christian, and so there's only 2 places to go, and I'm hoping I go through the stairs upstairs, and as soon as I see Rob, I'm going to make out with him, and then I'm going to punch him. But this is what he gave me, which is amazing. You see, I've never been married. I don't know if I believe in till death do us part kind of thing, and maybe it's because of I see so many people who are in love one minute and not the other and divorcing, and it just scares me. I only want to get married once. I've never had children, but man, I know what it feels like to be a daughter-in-law. Because on September 10th, to launch this Live Well, Die Well tour, I was with Rob's parents in a room with 100 and some people reading that same story while they were in the crowd listening. It was probably the 2 greatest people that Rob could have ever left me was his parents. Funny, passionate, and just so real. And I feel very, very fortunate to still have them in my life. But you know, there's this misconception. 18 months later, that face, he died. He doesn't look like he is sick. And maybe he wasn't then. But get this, he was scaling a building in February with the FBI in Indianapolis, and he was dead May 7th. And this is really, truly what I want people to understand, is that this is a hospice patient. This is Miss Norma. And Tim and Remy, the people that I mentioned before, Tim showed up in the RV with his wife or partner, Remy, and Tim showed up, and his dad was actively dying, and eventually did die, and Miss Norma was diagnosed with 4th-stage ovarian cancer. And Tim's like, Mom, I live in an RV, me and Remy live in an RV. What, do we look for an assisted living for you, or do you want to come along? And guess what she said? She said no, at 90 years old, said no to treatment and yes to living. And the last year of her life she spent in the RV. And get this, Remy thought, man, this would be a great thing just to do a Facebook page, Drive in Miss Norma. Because people started gifting her things everywhere she went. You know, and hot air balloon, and even Ellen DeGeneres called. And Miss Norma was like, I'm too old for TV. She died in the RV in the state of Washington because hospice serves people where they're at. And after that, and they got over like 1.5 million followers on Facebook. Why? What is so intriguing about a 90-year-old woman who is living with a serious illness? Is it because she's living more than we are? Perhaps? Over 1 million followers. Crazy. So there's only one time that I really, truly, see if I can find my little cursor here, truly wanted to unplug the clock. You see, even with Rob, I never wanted to stop time. I wanted to find out answers. But when you work at a hospice organization and a coworker gets sick, and a coworker you manage gets sick, it's a whole different thing. And when you're sitting at your VP desk and an email comes across saying Carol Cressman died this morning, and you're looking at Carol's chair and the phone's ringing for other people that need you because their loved one is facing end of life, you just want to unplug the clock because your head and heart just can't catch up. And so what I would normally do is I would run down to the children's bereavement room and toss myself into this beanbag. I mean, this beanbag that just kind of engulfed you, and cry, because I didn't want people to see me upset. But in hindsight, I think that's all the staff needed, was to see me brought to my knees, because I hurt too. But when Carol died, and just to tell you a little bit about Carol, the only thing wrong with her was she was a Philadelphia Eagles fan, and I'm a Redskin fan. I know y'all don't have a football team in Iowa, so y'all aren't fans of the NFL. No, I think y'all like the Vikings, right? Yeah, no. What's your team?
I don't care.
Redskins your team now. So she would decorate and my office with green crap and Eagles crap every time, because we were in the same conference, and text me during, we would just banter, fun, back and forth. And that's who she was. And she lived in New Orleans before a small storm called Katrina chased her out, and her house was destroyed, and she wound up in Wilmington, but she brought New Orleans with her, because every Mardi Gras she would order a king cake and it would be delivered, and everyone had to kind of like get in line to line up for the number of who could get the first king cake, because guess what's in the king cake?
I don't know what that is.
A king cake is what they have during Mardi Gras that has a naked baby somewhere baked into the king cake. And if you have that little plastic naked baby now, and if you get the baby in your slice of the king cake, luck for a year. And so everybody, it looked like wolves have mauled that king cake by the time we were done with it. I mean, it was just, but that she had beads and would dance, and it was just crazy. I mean, how the office felt like we were right there in New Orleans. This is who Carol was. And when her funeral came around, it was, you showed up and, of course I'm running late, and they're dancing with flask in a conga line with a king cake and drinking from flask. And I look over at the funeral director, and he's just like, I've never seen such a thing in all my life. And I said, man, Carol would have loved this. Carol would have loved this. This is truly her. So on the day that we got that email, I went down to the bereavement room, and this is what happened. If I can get on the right page. On the day we lost Carol, I wanted to find peace in the beanbag once again. But as I walked into the art room, I found our healing arts coordinator working with a hospice patient on a painting. Ironically, he was instructing her on artistic technique, almost giving her tips on how to be a better artist. And with a straight face, my coworker Lorraine took the advice and thanked him just as I walked through the door. Hey, Kimberly, she said, come in and meet the artist. This 83-year-old hospice patient stopped what he was doing, turned to me, and said, wow, you're what we call a looker back in New York City in the 1930s. What? 30s? Lorraine chuckled, and so did I. I do believe flattery gets you everywhere, and I melted within moments of the introduction. What are you working on? I asked, looking at his work. Well, beautiful, this is what I call a watercolor. he responded, still sweet-talking me. It was a stunning floral. When I'm done, this one's for you, he said. I can't buy you flowers, but I can paint them. You're a mess, I teased back. Glad you noticed, he said with a wink. On the day my heart was breaking because of a loss of another coworker, I did not find solace and warmth in the comfort of the beanbag, but I found it in the comfort of the eyes of a dying artist and hospice care. I better get back to work, Casanova, I said. I'm here every Tuesday, stop by again, like he's holding business hours for me to hey, stop by again. So I did. Over the next 4 weeks, I would visit with the artist on Tuesday. I learned about his life as Lorraine would snicker under her breath because he never stopped flirting with me. You should come over and let me cook you my favorite meal of all times, he suggestively proposed. Lorraine eyeballed the situation, obviously wondering how I was going to get myself out of this one. Sure, I said, as long as your art teacher can come too. The night at his house was one of effortless joy. As Lorraine and I watched this patient cook dinner for us and his family, the evening became full of simple pleasures and tenderness. I knew this patient was dying, and although he was breathless at times over the hot stove, he refused assistance and simply enjoyed serving his family and 2 new friends one last time. The conversation came so easily that night. It was as if I was an extended family member catching up on lost times, not a paid employee at hospice. I lived his life vicariously through the stories he shared. I found myself changing as I watched this man. I was seeing life from a different perspective. I found myself becoming more aware of the small things in life and how the small things become big things at the end of life. It made me think this entire dying thing was given a bad reputation because this man was living, not dying. The last Tuesday I saw him, we had a great visit. As I started to leave and head back to my office, something unexpectedly happened. I was educated on the importance of a goodbye. You know, when we depart in New York City, we usually kiss one another, he announced without his eyes leaving the easel. Really? I asked. Yep, he said. As I bent down and kissed him on the cheek, he said, that is not how we kiss goodbye in New York City. He turned toward me, looked me in the face, closed his eyes, and puckered his lips. I looked at my coworker, Lorraine. She provided no support whatsoever and leaned back in her chair to watch what was about to unfold. What do you do when a dying man asks for a kiss on the lips? Well, you do it. I bent down and I kissed him while his eyes were still closed, right smack on the lips. And as I stood back up, I noticed my boss in the doorway, watching everything. As I walked past her, she said, well, you'll do anything for a hospice patient now, won't you? All I could muster was, it was his dying wish to kiss me. A few days later, Lorraine stood at my office door with the floral watercolor in hand. There were no words needed. I knew the artist had left this world, and the painting was his final gift to me. He made me laugh. He made me blush. And man, did he make me feel important. Isn't that what we hope we do for others throughout this life? I hope one day, when I'm a hospice patient and I'm painting or writing or reading, when some young, attractive person crosses my path and pauses to learn something about me and my life, I hope I have the same guts to be so bold to ask for a kiss. You know, the thing is, Carol was like the 7th coworker that we lost over my 17 years there. And so once again, I was debating, can I continue to do this? Why don't I just go back to television? Because, you know, tears were coming down. I was walking down the hallway, trying to get to the bereavement room, thinking I need to leave. And here, this dying patient convinced me to stay, not by saying anything, but by making me feel important. I don't think Jerry ever knew what he did that day. And I think I say that because I'm not sure that strangers that have appeared in my life ever know the full magnitude of what they've done for me. And so I really try to be present, because you never know when you're the teacher or when you're the student. One day, coming out of Florida, I think it was February. I was on I-95 North, and the RV stopped working. And I was in the far left lane of I-95, and when you lose electricity, everything stops. Gas, power steering. And so I was sort of trying to guide my way over 4 lanes on I-95 to the right side of the road because I tow a car behind my RV. So it's about 48 feet. And so I pulled over and I was cussing because it's a brand new RV. I'm just like 4 months into this book tour. And I'm just like, ah! And then I stopped and I thought, I'm alive. My dog's okay. So what do you do on the side of I-95 waiting for the tow truck driver? You make coffee and you watch Young and the Restless because you can stream anywhere. And so when the knock came on the door, I opened it up and there was this like 300-pound tow truck driver in tears. And all I could think of was, oh my gosh, you're broken down too? And he's like, nope. And he said, I lost my mother a few weeks ago. And I guess he was looking at all the logos on the RV, so I invited him in and gave him a cup of coffee. And he sat there and told me how his mother or his grandmother became his mother. It was a powerful story. He towed my RV to Ford, and as I was following in my car, I thought, man, he should go on top of my RV and write a note to her because I want to take her with me. And so when we got to Ford, he did. And now I have over 300 names on top of the RV. And just the other day in South Dakota, a gentleman climbed the back ladder and put his son's name on there because he lost him in a car accident when he was 15. Not 15, 18 maybe. I think you drive at 18. But it's that thing. What if I was pissed off at the world when that tow truck driver came? Would I have lost the opportunity to connect with another human being? Because get this, as I was coming into Vermont in my New England stretch of the tour, I get this random text because I give out my phone number to anyone who wants it and my email address because this trip's about connection for me. And I get this text saying, what state are you in? Tow truck driver. And I'm like, man, that's why I'm doing this. So what I've learned, a lot of people ask me, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned from the dying? And I say it's this one, is that time is not measured in length, it's measured in depth. And I was not with a lot of these people who taught me how to live, but man, we had a lot of depth in there. Just like that tow truck driver and me, sitting on the side of I-95. You know, when I was in high school, my mom used to bake a bundt cake. Do you know what a bundt cake is, right? And she would put it on the cooling rack and go around to all of us kids and say, don't touch the cake or I'll kill you, you know, or you're dead meat, you know. But why was she baking a bundt cake? So she was hoping that on Saturday, that when if neighbors showed up, she would have something to offer them with a cup of coffee. What do we do now when the doorbell rings? We hide. We're like, how rude. They didn't even text before they rang that doorbell. And this is the thing. That was not that long ago, where everything revolved around relationships and connection. You talk to my grandmother that is long gone, and all she had was one bed for 4 or 5 siblings. And if she got an orange and a new pair of shoes for Christmas, she thought she was rich. And every day she goes, we grew up rich, which I know she grew up poor because we had relationships. And I think technology has somewhat made us a little less human. Because I think social media is the true fake news. Because I see people in all their life on social media, and then I hear they committed suicide 2 weeks later. I think the epidemic is loneliness in this world. And get this, when you have a patient, a dying patient, a person facing a serious illness, living alone, and they have, let's just say, COPD in the later years, 84 years old, and you admit him to hospice, and you have 4 different people going into this house to care for this one person, guess what happens? They get better because of socialization. And I think we forget how important connection is. So your homework tonight is, I want you to call someone for me, someone that means something to you, because I would love to talk to Rob, and I can't. So instead of texting, instead of emailing, pick up the phone, not on your way home, but maybe in the parking lot or when you get to your driveway, before you go in, and all the other madnesses of life meet you at the door, called children or husband or spouse. Call them and hear their voice, because you never know when you're not going to hear it. And this, one of my greatest teachers of all times when I was a kid was Mr. Rogers. And I love Mr. Rogers because he taught me just so many things, simple things, about how to be human. And this, I wanted to end on tonight, this video, and really let you hear it. So just a few things, and then I'll conclude. I do have books here, and I humbly say this, these are not my stories. They're the stories of my teachers who inspired me to cash in my retirement at 45 and just happened to be sitting in a chair in Iowa, trying to change how we talk, how we plan, and how we hope to experience end of life. And I tell you, even the dying are living, because I'm looking at dying human beings right now, and I am very much aware that as soon as I was born, I was also dying. And the question is, are we going to be the ones who will have the article that says he lived fully? Because when I was in Wisconsin recently, there was a tragic accident in Montana, an 81-year-old who jumped out of a plane 2,000 times. For the first time, his parachute did not open, and he fell to his death. And the article front page said he lived fully. How many people, as tragic as you might think that is, how many people die doing what they love? And how many people can say they lived a full life? Because get this, most dying people are 100% living. Those who do not have a serious illness, they're allowing something to die inside them a little bit every day. And what I want each of us in this room to do when we find ourselves on our deathbed, I want us to look over our shoulder and think, there's nothing else to do. Everything has been said, and now it's time for the next great adventure. And that's what I hope for each one of you. And that's why I don't focus on, there are legal paperwork in every state that you need. And I highly encourage you to grab my business card or a postcard or a flyer or buy my book and read some of these lessons. Rob's story fully is in here. And also, if you would like to put a name on top of the roof, you can email me and I'll send you a picture of their name painted among the other 300 people, so I can carry them with me as well. There is such connection and loss, because around campfires with complete strangers, we're talking about and laughing about love and loss. Just the other day, when that gentleman climbed the back steps and told me about his son and how he went in to the hospital room, and the entire story about how he had to let go, and that he died that night too, and that his grief was reborning, or he was being rebirthed every day since his son died. And there is no closure in grief when you lose someone. You know, a lot of people say, hey, when are you going to get over that guy Rob? Never. Never. It will go with me. And when you love, that is the price you pay, as there is no closure. You just hope you learn to live well with your grief. And that's the price of loving and connection. And so I hope I grieve a lot in my life, because that's a measuring stick of how much I have opened myself up and been vulnerable. I'm going to let you go. I know we're running a little bit over time. I do have books. I would love to sign it to you. Just let me know. They're $20, and I do have a little square if you have a debit card. But they're $20 even. But if not, if you'd like to hang out, or if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions right now as well. And everybody has to at least take 10 slices of cheese with them. Any questions? Does everybody have their advance directives? Raise your hand. Awesome. It's really important to visit those once a year. And if you're kind of like, what is she talking about? Come grab my business card and call me or email me, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. Because you just never know in this disease management system that we find ourselves in called healthcare. When you cannot speak for yourself, you need someone to speak as you. So thank you so much for showing up tonight and hearing my stories. And I'll hang out for a little bit, and thanks so much. So.